G'day. Tonight's episode, we're speaking to SL Kanthan, a geopolitical analyst, columnist, blogger, author, and podcaster who's based in Bangalore, India. And he focuses on the emerging multipolar world through an Indian perspective, analyzing economics, politics, technology, and global affairs. We look forward to exploring a deep dive into India, its ambitions, and Australia's role within the region. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. SL Kanthan, how are you tonight?
Wonderful, Joel. Very glad to be with you.
Very much looking forward to tonight to having a bit of a chat about India's role in a multipolar world and essentially how Australia can interact within this world.
You know, we are living through a really fascinating time, and it can also be very stressful for a lot of people. And there are big shifts happening in terms of geopolitics, geoeconomics, and migration, and so many things are happening at the same time. And the middle class in the Western countries are suffering a lot because of globalization. So we have a lot to talk about. And then there's also, potential wars where, well, your country, Australia, might get pulled in. So we have a lot to talk about. Yeah.
So, look, I'd like to start off with, your unique perspective, essentially, from an Indian lens, looking at India as a rising power in a multipolar world. You've written and, you speak regularly on India's key role in this emerging multipolar world. Could you provide a bit of an overview on India, India's current geopolitical strategy in this emerging world?
Sure. So we're actually struggling. We're still trying to find our position in this very complex world. But in terms of the economy, India has been growing very fast over the last 20, 25 years. So it's not as fast as China, but we are still very fast. So just in the last 10 years or so, India has surpassed France, the UK, and this year it surpassed Japan in terms of nominal GDP. So it's now the fourth largest economy in the world, and it's going to surpass Germany within 2 years because Germany's economy is so stalled. Uh, so that means that India's geopolitical power is also growing. And then in terms of geotechnology, because but technology matters a lot these days, Um well, it always mattered, right? If you look at, I mean, the European, the colonialism, the biggest strength they had was the technology. They were able to build massive ships. They had the guns and the cannons, and that made all the difference in terms of wars. So in the modern times, it's, what software you have, what semiconductor chips you have, all that is almost as powerful as the guns and cannons of the past. So in that area also, India is growing. But the struggle comes in terms of, you know, uh, we thought that the Cold War was over in 1992, right? But now it's kind of coming back with a lot of fierce nature. I mean, it's almost back to the future, a deja vu. But this time it's between the US and China, and then Russia is also a big player. And then we see the wars in the Middle East, those also matter. And so now India is stuck in between, and it has to balance all these demands and the powers. The US has spent a lot of time in the last 25 years or so nurturing good relations with India. But Trump, in his second term, just in the last month or so, that relationship, the 20 years of the efforts are just going downhill so fast. It's really scary. So we have to, because for the US, like Secretary Blinken once said, well, either you are at the table, well, or you are on the menu. Okay, so that is the US attitude. If you're not 100% aligned with us, we're going to beat you up, then you'll be on the menu.
We speak about this non-alignment that India has it sort of runs through their veins, history of non-alignment. Could that sleeping tiger be waking a little bit there, as far as that history and that culture of non-alignment as it navigates this current period?
Yeah, yeah. Why should we take sides? We want to be friends with the US. We want to be friends with Russia. We want to be sort of friends with China. It's not so sure. But we should have the strategic autonomy, what is the point in talking about sovereignty of nations, like, which is the foundation principle of the United Nations and the rules-based order. So, but every country should be able to decide what's best for them, and it's in the best interest of the countries to not make enemies. We live in a very, very globalized world. We're all linked with one another in terms of, supply chain, for example. If you just take a look at your smartphone, the smartphone has parts or the components from like 40 different nations or something like that, right? So we all have to learn to live with one another, and we really cannot afford to make enemies. But look at your country, right? I mean, Australia, its biggest trade partner is China, and then the US comes in and says, hey, Australia, we need you to sign up for a war against China. Why should Australia choose that? I mean, Australia should just be like, hey, man, leave me alone. I just want to, be peaceful down under. I don't care what the hell you guys are doing up north. Right? And
And
that's sort of
Australia
a
does
similar.
so isolated at the bottom of the earth, with not as much clout as India, I suppose. So yes, we have our own unique set of challenges with that regard.
Yeah, yeah. And for India, we are very close friends with Russia. And Russia has been a loyal friend for like 75 plus years. And it's a very, very stable relationship. And it's very rare in the international relations to have such stable relations between two nations for such a long time, because geopolitics is very ruthless. It's very Machiavellian. The countries backstab one another all the time. Uh, so it's really refreshing for us to have a really good, stable friend like Russia. The US has not been a very good friend always. When we got independence in 1947, the British Empire was very mad for losing India, which was called the crown jewel of the British Empire. So they were very mad at losing India, and the US and the UK are like, two peas in a pod. So the US also turned against India. They had a lot of sanctions. We didn't have much relationship throughout the Cold War. And then when India tested nuclear weapon. The U.S. imposed more sanctions, blah, blah, blah. And only in the last 20 years, the US India relations really boomed. Both countries benefited. And as Biden said last year, I believe, he said that the relations with India for the US is going to be the most consequential in the 21st century. But now Trump seems to have a different point of view.
Definitely, and like on that, and I want to get to the limitations being put, or the attempt to limit India's national interest with regards to its sovereign decision making, with its relationships. Most of that probably coming outside of Washington. But it's interesting that you mentioned, the Machiavellian nature of the relationship, well, particularly between the US and India here. When you look at from the West, when you look at the relationship between Russia and India, there's a lot of miscalculation put there, I think. As you said, the strength and stability and the enduring nature of that relationship over time, as opposed to the more troublesome relationship with Washington that has also been, conflicted with Washington's involvement in Pakistan for a long time as well. You saw that courtship of Modi going on. It seemed to go on for a few years there, where he was just a rock star and he was filling up stadiums and they were patting him on the back. Now, was this the culmination of this 20-year about face from Washington with regards to pouring sugar on the Indian area of the world and trying to kind of wrest it or pry it away from the Eurasian landmass and all the dealings going on there? I mean, was this like the attempt, as America usually gets revealed, its strategic intent is usually a little bit bitterer and not as sweet as it first appears. So, do you think that was also something that India's sort of cottoned onto over time?
Yeah, yeah. The one thing is that the U.S. has a lot of, I mean, the influence in India. You look at the mainstream media, the think tanks, they're all very, very pro-US. A lot of them are actually funded by the US corporations or the NGOs like Bill Gates Foundation and so on. So a lot of the intellectuals were not able to see the real nature of the U.S. You know, and also like a lot of these, you look at the politicians in India, their children, most of the times they go to the U.S. to study in college. They live in the U.S. They get their citizenship. You know, the head of the World Bank right now, he is, he was from India and then he moved to the U.S. Technically, he's like an American citizen, but he's an Indian, and he's now the head of the World Bank. And similarly, the Indian Americans have become CEOs of Google, Microsoft, and many other large corporations. So when you bring in like an immigrant and you make him very successful, he cannot think straight anymore. He's like, oh, I love America. I love the American model, the neoliberalism, and they cannot see the wars. Why are the wars happening? They cannot see the US bombing Libya, bombing Syria, bombing Gaza, endless wars, and these like 700 military bases around the world, spying on everybody, doing coups. Like in your country in the 1970s, there was a prime minister. I forgot, Whitlam,
Whitlam,
I
yes.
believe.
Yes,
Yeah.
Gough
So
Whitlam, yep.
in yeah, so he was the guy who did not want Australia to participate in the Vietnam War, and he wanted the CIA to leave Australia. And then the US and the UK joined hands and they basically staged a coup. They got rid of him, you know.
And you can
Happened.
argue we've never had a sovereign foreign policy ever since.
Yeah, yeah, very sad, you know. So, so the problem with a lot of the Indians is that they cannot see all these shenanigans of the U.S. Deep state and the empire. So we've always had a blind spot, and I've been writing about this for a long time. I've been like, guys, don't be fooled by this. You are dealing with like a really, really nasty empire, So, I mean, the average American might be nice, and living in the US might be nice, but you have to be very clear-eyed about the empire, the US foreign policy, and so on. Yeah. So the US is mad at India because India does not allow the US military bases, right? And that's like the first requirement to be like a friend of the US, So if you want to be like an ally, if you want the the word, the ally associated, you need to become a vassal. Okay, a vassal is an ally. It's just, the euphemistic term, and you need to let the U.S. military bases in. You need to be 100% aligned with the U.S. foreign policies. So there are all these requirements, and India is not saying okay to that. And then, India has also grown too fast, right? So just like what happened to China, right? If you go back and watch the YouTube videos from say 2005, 6, 7, the Americans were in love with China. They used to talk about Chimerica, China plus America. They're like, oh, we're such a wonderful combination. The Chinese people work so hard, and we are making a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars in China. And then when China became a little bit too powerful, then they turned against China. And they don't want a second China to happen with India. So we're seeing the growing pains in geopolitics.
It's incredible to witness the West, which is having its, unique and challenging set of its own problems to deal with, looking not only to contain China, but India as well, two of the civilizational state superpowers that have been flexing their muscles for, thousands of years. And it's quite incredible to witness, like, from containing China as a regional hegemon to still maybe technically containing China as a regional satrap and starting to realize in Washington that, the 20 years of sugar wasn't enough. And India is now going to pursue its own options. So we saw just recently there was a weapons deal cancelled, quite a lucrative weapons deal cancelled with the United States. And we had Modi's first visit to China in a decade or something like that.
In like 7 years, yeah.
Incredible. So you have this big shift, including a Lula Brazil stop off. It seemed like Modi was almost going to jump off bricks about a year ago in the West. That's the kind of message they were conveying, and now it seems like he's jumping in with open arms as a founding member. So which one is it? And also, what is this emerging relationship with China and how does it intersect with Russia?
Mm. So, we are in a very fluid situation. So we cannot really, really predict the future. And, because, there are a lot of people in the Indian establishment who love America and who want India to be very, very pro USA. But there are also some other people who are looking ahead, like, 10, 15 years from now, and they're like, hey guys, listen, there is going to be a multipolar world. So but India was very much pro-China for a long time, from say 2000 to 2017 or so. For 17 years, we had really, really good relations with China because we didn't see China as a threat, And then suddenly China became too powerful, and they were also becoming very influential in all the neighborhoods of India, uh, because each country wants its own sphere of, I mean, influence, right? So they want to make sure that their neighbors are not going to turn against them, and they have good trade relationship, and they have mutual respect. It's like one of the first lessons of geopolitics is that make sure that all your neighbors are friendly towards you at the least, and at the best they will be sort of subordinates to you. So this goes back to the old the empires and so on. But then what happened was China became so powerful that it had a lot of influence, so it started to pull the neighbors away from India. So like Sri Lanka became very pro-China, Maldives became very pro-China, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and Myanmar, like they all had, they went to China because China has the money, China has the infrastructure power, right? So the Chinese can say, hey, Sri Lanka, we'll build a port for you, we'll build highways, railways, seaports, airports, stadiums, schools, so which politician wouldn't want that, right? It's very tempting. So then India started to get very concerned that China is stepping all over our sphere of influence. And then Pakistan became a huge issue, right? So we've had terrible relations with Pakistan for a long time. And I hope sometime in the future we could be friends. But, since 1947 independence, for 80 years we've been fighting one another, treating each other as the enemies. And then when the US stepped away from Pakistan after the end of the Cold War, because the US was using Pakistan as like a geopolitical tool against the Soviet Union. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, the US just packed and left. And they left Afghanistan, they left Pakistan, and Pakistan suffered a lot. They had huge problems with terrorism, drug dealing, violence, and then suddenly they lost all the financial aid from the U.S. I mean, it's sort of a basket case country to start with, and then so all these problems made it very, very worse. So they were really struggling. And then in the 2000s, when China became rich, Pakistan found a great partner in China. And when Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013, Pakistan and China found a win-win opportunity is to make one of the ports in Pakistan a huge, successful port, and then they can have all these pipelines from Pakistan to China, roads and the highways. And then China's plan was twofold. One is to have to have a neighbor who's a subordinate, and then who could be possibly be used against India in the future, just in case. So that was number one. And number two was that in case there is a war with the US, like in case there is a China-US war, and the US will try to block the Malacca Strait, which is around Malaysia, Singapore, and that would choke China's trade with the rest of the world. So if that happens even partially, China thought, oh, then we have a shortcut through Pakistan, and we can still get the oil, gas, we can do some trade. So geopolitically, Pakistan has become very, very important, vital for China's survival. But that well, unfortunately meant problems with India. And then in the border situation, both countries made the mistake of positioning the soldiers too close to the border. So we had a couple of clashes, soldiers died, and then the India-China relations just went downhill so fast. It was just terrible for about 4 years.
And we had
And then
we
I
had the
think,
border skirmishes, and we had the escalation in actual conflict and tension there too, right?
yeah, so that happened in 2017 at one point in the Far East, and then 2020 in Kashmir, and it became really bad. I think both countries failed in diplomacy. So that was terrible for both countries. And then the US jumped in and they said, hey, India, we'll make you the China plus one. Okay. We'll make you the new manufacturing powerhouse, and we will move all the manufacturing from China to India. So that was the plan.
It's very it's we're all seeing this from a different angle, and it happened within India itself. From the sounds of it, there was such a large Chinese influence and a bilateral relationship that was developing in its own right. And in Australia here, we had all guns blazing for Beijing. We were setting up cross-cultural institutions. There was large, investment encouraged. There was huge tourism, and Mandarin was a very viable option for young Australians to learn in their colleges. And then all of a sudden, this pivot to India kind of happened here in Australia as well. And it was during the sugar period, the Bruce Springsteen period, where Modi came to Australia. We had what was it? A quad summit here that no one attended. Biden couldn't be bothered flying down here, so Modi just came in, waltzed in, and made it all about him. Made it all about himself. And there was that classic footage of Anthony Albanese saying he saw Bruce Springsteen at the same stadium venue, and it was nothing compared to seeing Modi, and Modi was the real boss. It was almost like a very awkward pivot here in Australia, because we were really integrating with this Chinese economy, and this embrace with India started beginning. There was increases in migration and student intakes, and now we have a whole different approach and a very important developing Indian community in Australia as a consequence. So does India have the ability to be this Western China plus one? Or does it have some work to do to actually get there? And potentially could the West and its big companies like Apple, who tacitly admit that China is such an integral part of everything they do, is this a realistic pivot for the West to essentially be able to depend on India, especially now India's facing its own national interest a lot more and looking to pursue that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the answer is maybe, partially, because we cannot match the Chinese manufacturing, right? We cannot, match, the infrastructure, the ecosystem, how they work, right? So they work, they have the whole of a society approach. the central government will work with all the provinces, and they will work with all the major corporations. So they all get together and they plan together and they make it happen, you know. In India, you have democracy, you have every state thinks on its own. It's very hard to plan in a holistic fashion, you know. China does an amazing job, right? They can say, okay, so this province is by the ocean, so we are going to do this type of industry. We will build the seaports, and then next to that province on the west side, we will do mining, and then on the southern province here, we will do manufacturing of cars, and then on that province over here, we will do semiconductors. So they can do planning like nobody else can. So China has this amazing capability to plan and to execute the plan. They can do 5-year plans, 10-year plan, 15-year plans, and they always seem to accomplish their goals. Like Xi Jinping in 2015, he came up with the Made in China 2025 plan. And then you see what has China accomplished by 2025. China has met like almost 90% of the goals that it set back in 2015. And then you look at India and you go back what the politicians promised 10 years ago, and then you see where we are now. Like maybe we accomplished like 20% of the goals set 10 years ago. So we're not very good in management, project management. We lack that skill, and the political system is too chaotic. So we have some disadvantages. So we will never be able to become another China, but maybe we can become like one half of China, in terms of manufacturing and so on.
Are there initiatives being put in place by anyone in India that's looking to change that decentralized, the loose decentralized nature of the Indian economy and the way it does things, to look at sort of planning more national projects that kind of, yeah, can be more effective for the country, but also be able to compete at some way with greater powers?
Yeah, well, I keep writing about it, but nobody seems to listen. So there are, so I wish they would make me like the czar of, I mean, the infrastructure and the process, like people don't think about the process. There are so many things where like the process is so horrible, like whether it's like as simple as you go to a website, the government website to do something, and it's so chaotic and the rules are so complex and just meaningless bureaucracy, and nothing makes sense. They make life more difficult than it has to be. So, how to think of a nation as a system, and then how to think of the processes. And you have to think about the first order effect, the second order effect, the third order effect, and you have to plan like in advance, and you have to focus on all the little things. So, for example, like we get a lot of monsoon winds, I mean, monsoon rains, right? So it's happening right now today. But most of the monsoon water goes back into the ocean. You know, we should be building lakes and ponds everywhere to store a lot of the monsoon winds. Because what happens is when the summertime comes, we run out of water. So I live in Bangalore, the Silicon Valley of India, and then we have to drill literally like with 200 feet, 500 feet, 1,000 feet, sometimes to get the groundwater, you know, and
With these environmental challenges, though, and the scale of India ramping up its production, can it sustain its economy and its trajectory using the methodologies that it's using at the moment, which by the way you're talking about it, have some way to make?
right. Yeah, no, those are serious problems. So, like, if you look at the 100 most polluted cities in the world, 60 to 70 are from India. Okay. Like, we have so much problem with pollution, and we're not even a manufacturing a superpower like China. If you look at the manufacturing, the output, we are a much smaller fraction of China's. So just imagine if we built like 10 times more factories, what would be the effect on pollution? What would be the effect on water, land? But nobody seems to be, planning. So, like, that's why I'm saying that we need like a holistic people whose job is to look at the very, very big picture. And then we need one set of people who look at all the granular things. Like when China makes a plan to build the high speed rail, they make it happen. They build like 2,000 3,000 kilometers of high speed rail in just 1 year, like as if it's no big deal. And I'm in Bangalore. They took 10 years to build 50 kilometers, okay, not 50,000, but 50 kilometers of metro. It took them 10 years. Come on. Somebody needs to get their act straight.
You mentioned all these challenges for India, and I think that something in the West that sometimes they're misunderstood or overlooked a fair bit, especially for maybe those upstairs that are looking to hopefully reroute their companies or their business or their geopolitics through India at the expense of China. But people are coming up short all the time. And you mentioned India's prosperity under Modi, which I'd like to get into the nature of the Modi government as well a little bit while I've still got you. But under Modi, India has had some prosperity, not quite like Xi in China, uh, but some of that prosperity may be attributed to the end stage of neoliberalism, kind of washing things that it doesn't have to do in China through India, and making a very rich class in India at the expense of a lot of stagnation in development, poverty staying the same, and not too much benefit for people on the streets. So, is the Modi government? It's been around for a long time, and it's been maintaining this status quo for a long time. Do you feel that the Indian public now is starting to feel that it needs a change?
Mm. Well, actually, I don't know because they don't do very good polls in India. You know, so for example, if you look at the U.S., you'll have Gallup and Pew Research and Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. They all do lots of polls all the time, and they ask very smart questions. They always have a very good finger on the pulse of the moods of the American people, and you can get a lot of really good answers. But in India, they don't have they don't do a lot of polls. So I cannot take my personal experience and my circle of friends and say this is what it is. But Modi government lost a lot of the seats, a lot of seats in the recent election. So people are, but that might be just based on uh, because people are not always rational, like especially in India where we have like very close to 1 billion people still living in rural areas. They may not be very well educated to think about, hey, what is the GDP per capita? What is the inflation, blah, 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 right? Like they don't think in terms of statistics, economics, geopolitics. They may just go by their personal experiences. And then, sometimes you have all these like religious nutcases, and then politics becomes like so dragged into Hindu, Muslim, this, blah, blah, blah. And then why people get elected is has got nothing to do with what's good for the country, what's good for the economy, and so on. So that's also a problem in India. Now, so Modi has done some stuff, very good in terms of the infrastructure, uh, but he doesn't have a power like say Xi Jinping. So Modi cannot tell all these state ministers. He cannot tell corporations how to do. So he may say, "Oh, I want to build 1,000 bridges," but then 300 of those bridges are in like a really bad condition 1 month after construction. So that's beyond Modi's control, right? So like in China, if that happens, they would probably be sent to jail, the contractors. Like one guy in India, he built a bridge and the turning point was 90
I
degrees.
saw the
Okay, so
picture. I
it's,
saw the picture of this bridge.
yeah, like what kind of a moron? I
It
mean,
was like a freeway.
like,
It was like a freeway overpass, right?
yeah,
Yeah, I saw it.
unbelievable. And then they built some, the overpass, and then like literally a day after, I mean, it opens up, you find potholes, you know.
But this nebulization of effectiveness in government, hasn't it been a catch cry of many Indian leaders throughout history? I can't control this mess. I can't get my hands on any of these people to get the job done. I mean, how can India look at something different? Modi doesn't have the power of Xi, definitely not, and then the ability to plan things from a centralized command structure. But he's also used something that Xi has been tempting with at times, which is a fuel you can use in frustration of being able to get anything done, and that's nationalism. And I'd like to talk a little bit how nationalism has pervaded modern Indian society under Modi. We here in Australia some issues to do with Hindutva, BJP, extremist groups, young gangs going around the street in paramilitary formation sometimes. And you can't help but notice that there has been a aggravation in politics in India, particularly regarding the religious differences. You've said you hear things about the Muslim ban being put in place. So Modi has used this in his arsenal, nationalism and Hindu nationalism. So could you please explain just a little bit how that's affecting India in its at a societal level, and also at the way it sort of sees the world around it?
Yeah, yeah. It's really a bad form of nationalism. It doesn't make sense to me, So I'm like, I'm driving around Bangalore and I see trash, like so many places, like you would go to like a really beautiful mall and then you drive 1 block away from the mall and there's like trash on the street. And then there's like sidewalks. They look like, somebody dropped a bomb. It looks like a war zone. And I'm like, guys, what is nationalism? If why, like, why can you not, focus your nationalism to make India look good? Fix the damn roads, fix the trash, fix the power outage. So I'm in Bangalore and we have power outage every freaking day, like every day. Okay, so when was the last time you had a power outage?
I'd say maybe 4 to 5 times a year,
Yeah, see?
during storms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's so like you're living in a civilized world, you know, and I'm in Bangalore every freaking day. Sometimes it lasts for an hour, sometimes it lasts for like 6, 7 hours, straight, and you have no power and you can't do work. So just imagine the loss of productivity when this happens. So why is nobody talking about it? And so this whole the nationalism about the Hindutva, I don't know what good it's doing to the country, So I wish they would first of all, the Muslims and the Dalits, I mean, the very lower class, the lowest class. So the Muslims and the Dalits make up something like 20% of India's population, you know, and they are our brothers and sisters. And if they're not doing well, if they're not being productive citizens, that affects the GDP of the country, right? So, so there is the pragmatic reason to love your fellow citizens. It makes the country richer. And then also, I mean, all these fights are just terrible for the country. And these guys also have like a lot of delusional stuff, like a lot of these, the Hindutva are like, dreaming of India capturing Nepal, Pakistan, Bhutan, Bangladesh,
Bharat,
and
right?
becoming, yeah, I'm like, what are you talking about? You can't even fix the road. You can't do the basic stuff. And you want to, I mean, expand into a mass, they're dreaming of like 2000 years ago, we had an emperor. Man,
Kanthan, apart from these like delusional, these Alexander the Great kind of ideology, a lot of them seem to be quite colonial. These ideas as well, because we were speaking about the decentralized nature of India as an obstacle, but it's also been the special source of India, right? It's also been the ability of India to be a malleable and a state that can sort of move around and take this incredible mix of people that live within it. And hasn't it been the secret to its success is its tolerance and its sort of compassion for others? And it's really been trampled on over the last couple of decades under Modi. So, is this unique to Modi? And is this a colonial story? Is this a new thing? Because it doesn't feel like India could ever have survived if it was like this the whole time.
Yeah, yeah. When I grew up, I never once thought about the religion. I had Muslim friends in my school. I had, Christian friends in my school, and we all came from different caste. And I did not, like in my family, we never talked about like one religion being better than the other or one caste being better than the other. And just in the family, people worship so many different gods. So you have like one uncle believing in this god, one auntie believing in some other god, blah blah blah. And we have people from different languages, different customs, different food, different music, different dance. So when I grew up, it was like very, very tolerant and sort of like you said, like the whole thing about, the Hinduism is not a religion per se, but it's a way of life. It's supposed to be a philosophical way of life, and you don't even have to believe in God to be a good Hindu. It's a philosophy, but that has been lost in like the last 20 years or so. And now there are all these people like building temples after temples after temples. Oh my God, so many temples. I'm like, you have all this money to build temples, but you cannot fix the roads, you cannot fix the trash. Come on, what are the priorities?
It's incredible because you speak to a lot of Indians here in Australia, and Indian nationalism is quite high in the youth. There's a lot of love for India, love for the cricket teams, love for the culture, the music. I've worked with a couple of boys recently from Haryana who were showing me this incredible rap music they've been listening to. With all these cool kind of young kids coming up through the music. Uh, and yeah, it's this country that has this incredibly strong nationalism, but it seems behind that image of nationalism is a chaos that runs beneath it. And it juxtaposes with what you see on the surface. Is there a chance that India could be balkanized in a process of disunity?
I don't think so. We're kind of a crazy society where we fight a lot, but we also are like a family, you know. So maybe, but Kashmir is like one problem, but that's because of the Hindu Muslims. And but apart from the Muslims, all the others, I mean, so even with the Muslims, I would say like a vast majority, they feel like part of India, you know. And there are, some who may, think, oh, I don't feel like a part of India. But other than the Muslims, well, everybody
And
else,
Khalistan for maybe example as well.
yeah, as a Kazakhstan is like really like maybe 0.1% of the people, very, very small. But the Modi government made a big mistake by making the Khalistan a big issue, you know, and only the Khalistani people are like those funded by the Five Eyes, by the deep state in the US, UK, Canada, and maybe like in Australia a little bit. But you don't, like you don't see, and there are like usually say like 1,000 people, protesting in Canada or 1,000 people marching in the US.
But
They mean,
there's been a legitimate Punjabi disapproval of Modi and the Indian government for quite some time now over the issues with
yeah,
the
yeah.
farmers subsidies. So could some of this be engineered from outside? I'd love to talk about more on another occasion, but could they have some fair recompense? Do they have fair grounds to be feeling disenfranchised in Punjab?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because what the Modi government tried to do to the farmers was basically like neoliberal capitalism, bring in the big corporations to control the trade, the price of the agricultural products. So the farmers' protest was the right thing to do, and they saved the livelihood of the regular farmers. So, like as I said before, a lot of Indians they go to the U.S. To study at Harvard, whatever, blah blah blah, and then they get totally brainwashed by this neoliberal capitalism, and but that's very bad for a poor country. You cannot do neoliberal capitalism when your GDP per capita is only like $3,000. Okay, so maybe when you're like rich, 20,000, $40,000, and then you can say, but even then, you look at the U.S. They are suffering because of neoliberal capitalism. You know, half of all Americans are broke, living from paycheck to paycheck. Majority, something like 60% of the Americans cannot have a good quality of life, like meaning, like being able to go to college, being able to afford healthcare, going on vacation, having all the basics of life, like a good car, good phone, good TV, good stuff, like a solid middle class life is not affordable to 60% of the American households. So this neoliberal capitalism is very bad in so many ways. It's you the people talk about the U.S. Stock market, but the top 1% in the U.S., they own 50% of all the stocks and mutual funds and all, the assets. Uh, so
We're seeing how neoliberalism is sort of eating through the checks and balances and regulations of the West, like a coating of acid. But it must be a disastrous undertaking in India that it was already struggling, say with subsistence farmers, for example, and just having a neoliberal farming machinery imposed over the top of that. It must be devastating for large swathes of the Indian population, right?
yeah, yeah, something like 50% of the Indian population depend on some free food from the government every month.
Wow.
So they get like free rice, free grains, whatever. And that is how they're able to fudge the poverty numbers for the WHO and all that. And it's also the way they're able to avoid any big protests or revolution, just to keep the poor people barely, sustained.
That's incredible. So India's a government disaster away from a national breakdown, essentially. Like all it's going to take is a breakdown. That's 50% of the population, right?
I mean, so I talk to well-educated people in India, and I go, "Hey, man, why are you not?" So for example, there are 70 million stray dogs in India, 70, you know, and they freaking bark all night, and it's so hard, so I'm so scared to jog in India, because if I leave my block, the dogs in my block, they know me, so they're very, friendly, they're very happy to see me, and I give them, snacks and food. But if I leave my block, those are like crazy dogs. Okay, they don't know me. And if I'm, jogging, they're going to think that I'm running away from them, and they're going to chase me and probably bite my ass. So, so there are so many problems that and then I talk to people here. I'm like, hey, why don't you, like, why don't we do something? They're like, nothing can be fixed, and then they go into like the Hindu nihilism, what is the point? Yes, dog, street, all this suffering is just human nature, blah, blah, blah. So I don't think there will be a revolution in India. Like people are too, um, like, too, like they don't have the revolutionary spirit. They just will accept the status quo. And then if they don't like it, they leave India, they go to Australia, they go to the US, wherever. But the ones who stay are like too lethargic, too complacent.
By the way, when you think about India from another angle here, hearing it from you, there is just a litany of topics that need to be discussed in India, and even in order for it to unravel the Gordian knot that's in front of it, right? There's no easy way to slice it either, by the sounds of it. And yeah, people like yourself are keeping up at night thinking about it. Wanted to get on to the war in Gaza just briefly here. How Israel's war, Israel's some would say genocide in
Yes, it is a
Gaza
genocide.
and ethnic cleansing has been in front of us. The whole world has had its nose rubbed in this thing for over 650 days now. And Modi has an interesting relationship with Israel, and India itself has a very interesting relationship with Israel. And over the years, we have seen some sort of crossovers here between bilateral industrial relations, but even just sort of support in the diaspora, in certain areas of the diaspora for Zionism in Israel. I would. It's quite a unique and a unique situation to kind of unpack. And I was just wondering if you could shed a bit of light on the relationship between Israel and India and how there was also a poll where 60% of Indians are favorable towards Israel. So I'd just like to know a little bit how that relationship works and how people feel that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating because in 1947, when we got independence, and even if you look at, say, Gandhi, uh, we always supported the Palestinians. And uh, India was one of the first countries to recognize Palestine as a state. And we refused to recognize the Israeli government or the state for a long time. I think that only in like 1992 that the relationship between India and Israel became formalized. So we did not have good relations with Israel. We saw them as the colonialists and the imperialists who are stealing the land of the Palestinians. And we still officially support the two-state solution, but the Modi, the Hindutva movement has been like so anti-Muslim, anti-Islam that they view Israel as like somebody who is fighting the terrorists, you know. So they kind of, these people, they view it through the prism of Kashmir. You know, they're like, oh yeah, but Israel is going through the same thing that we are experiencing in Kashmir, the separatists, you know. So they don't know. These people on social media that you see, or the stupid politicians you might see, yeah, these people have no idea. They cannot point to Israel on the world map. They don't know the history. They don't know about Nakba. They don't know about the suffering of the Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza on a day-to-day basis. The Indian mainstream media don't show the devastation of Gaza on a day-to-day basis. You know, certainly, I mean, and even if they do, like maybe once every 2 months, the photo and the news would be like on the 14th page of the newspaper. You know, it never gets prominent coverage. So it's sad. It's sad, you know. Hopefully, but I mean, it goes both ways, you know. I mean, I see the Muslims on social media, they never have anything good to say about Hindus or Hinduism, India. You know, they always say negative things. And then soon you forget who started it, you know. Um,
There's one thing, a few words on social media, but I suppose supporting what we're seeing happening over there in Gaza is a whole different story. And we have the same problem here in Australia with like footy team politics, where people are choosing, like, it's almost like they're pinning their football team colors to something, and it doesn't matter what they do now. It's the team. It might be doing bad, but it's my team, and I've selected my team, and it can commit a genocide, and I'm still going to give it some kind of moral support. And it's funny because Australia has its own support for Israel that is very strong. But as much as there's been a couple of words and things like that at the expense of its international prestige, Australia has been the last one to the table in the West to condemn Israel for its actions. And it's funny how these former colonial states in the Anglosphere, in India, having these conflicted journeys and these strange relationships with this situation that are happening right now. While I've got you,
yeah.
I'd like to finish off with Australia. And, essentially, Australia's got an emerging, developing relationship with India. When we see India from here, we look at the Quad first and foremost as this it seems like a kind of a fraught and tenuous, sometimes loose grouping of nations that are, I don't even really know what they're trying to achieve in the Indo-Pacific. But for starters, how do you see India's future in the Quad? And how much should Australia be hoping for India to be a major player in that? And also, we had a scandal recently that was revealed about a nest of spies, Indian spies that were in Australia. It made international news, and our top intelligence chief presented that to the country. So, wanting to ask you a little bit of a question about how can Australia interact with an increasingly multipolar India, and also how does it deal? How is it going to deal with India as it sends things like spies, or it has its own strategic interests that it's trying to promote in the region, and Australia has to encounter that. So, what will Australia be coming up across in a new India, new multipolar India?
Okay. Well, but Australia has to take care of Australia, so it has to do what's best for you guys, right? And you have to, you there's no such thing as but trust in geopolitics, right? So, because you don't know, what India would be like 5, 10, 15 years from now, right? Like there may be a new leader who may be very pro-Australia, or he might go nuts, So you have to be very thoughtful, and you have to be pragmatic. But so given the fact that we are so far away, I think we could be very good friends, We could just find win-win opportunities. And as for the Quad, which is basically focused on China, or the containment of China, I don't know how China is going to behave, They say all the right things, but then you see, like, the imperialist tendencies in China sometimes, right? Like they have the nine dash line, which goes all the way down to the Philippines, and then to, so I don't understand why they have the nine dash line, because but no other country has such a huge claim, far, far away from their land.
Well, the Andaman Islands are a pretty far away claim for India, aren't they? About a couple of hundred
And
kilometers from the Indonesian coastline.
could be, could be. I mean, I have to look at the map, like because we stretch pretty far. So I think from Bengal to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands may not be that far, It may be pretty close. And so nobody else has a claim to that, by the way, right? So it's not like, say, Myanmar said, Myanmar could technically, they could have said that it's very close to them, but no other country has claimed the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Uh, but uh, but just you look at the South China Sea, so you don't have to be like a geopolitical the expert, and then you look at the South China Sea, the nine dash line. It is way too far from China, and it goes right into the borders of the Philippines, and then all the way to Vietnam, blah blah blah. It's just like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And then you look at the way China treats the Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. They're sort of, like this is how the Chinese empire, they used to be, right? For 2,000 years, they treated South Korea as a vassal state. And then China, they actually, occupied Vietnam for 1,000 years. And then, so they had this, like the superior state and the subordinate vassal state relationship. So they had that with Tibet, Xinjiang. So I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but this is how, I mean, like this is
With
kind
for
of a
I think Modi's visit to Xi might be telling the changing of that story, right? Because you mentioned those quite tenuous relationships with those 14 or so nations have contiguous borders with China, including Japan and things like that. But you could argue now with some, transcontinental railways, some economic partnerships, including with Vietnam, Korea, and there's a rapprochement happening with Japan right now, that
Mm,
China is actually parlaying with some of its more traditional rivals in a way that even like the conflicts in the South China Seas over the shoals, reefs, and atolls are now, essentially being managed. Scarborough Shoal is still an issue with the Philippines and things like that, but issues with Malaysia, Vietnam, EEZs, fishing areas, and things like that there's been some gains in that area, and potentially the relationship between India and China might represent a bit of a flow-on effect of China's, that wolf warrior diplomacy we were hearing so much about seems to have been cast aside for more regional engagement. Do you kind of agree with that, and do you also think that India has to, engage with that world island, as historian Jeff Rich was talking about the other week, McKinley's line there?
See, well, I'm not so sure. So I like China. I want China to be successful, and I hope China will have a peaceful rise. But for example, they're just celebrating or remembering the Japanese attack on China in the 1930s, and they just made a blockbuster movie now. So it's rekindling the past, uh, the hurt, but it also rekindling vengeance or a shout for vengeance. A lot of Japanese, some Japanese people, they have they even work and live in China, but like you look at the social media and so on, like these guys are like so anti-Japanese. One of the Communist Party group, they made this video about dropping the nuke again on Japan, and that video went viral in China. So I don't understand why they have to rekindle the past and to see, like, because if you say that I hate you, then that person is either going to fight or they're going to seek help, right?
Kanthan, like in the West and within India at a prolific rate, we're seeing, nationalist propaganda films being propped up. I mean, growing up in the West, all I ever watched was D-Day, World War II films where the West was the best and Americans were, saving the world. And in the
Yeah,
same
but you were not but
nature,
taught.
people in India are celebrating, historical milestones and battles and struggles for national survival against bigger foes and things like that. I mean, there seems to be, and I've heard a lot about this film, which is apparently quite a good production. There seems to be a little bit more of a comprehensive approach to this, and it might be more aimed at a national reflection, more so than a enraging the public against Japan. That said, it is a piece of large-scale, epic budget blockbuster film that China's now starting to engage in the same tradition of India and Hollywood, Bollywood and Hollywood there.
So I have to but disagree with that. Okay, so I mean, so here's why. Yes, but Hollywood makes thousands of movies about the Nazis, right? But at at the end of the movie, the Americans are not were taught to hate Germany, right? So like they're able to separate that, and then the very next day, the German the chancellor could come to the U.S. and they have very good relations,
But the
right?
movies were designed
But
to
that's not
cause.
the case here.
They were designed to cause a hatred of, or enmity towards the Nazis and what they did, but not so much the German people. And there may be
Right,
another thing here. There might be a few Japanese that watch this film in the cinemas to reflect on things that they're not taught in history books in high school. Still, it's quite a complex history, and the rape of Nanking was a very significant event. And yes, look, it's obviously a film built by a nationalist, large scale communist government that is proving films of this nature to channel certain aspects of nationalism, no doubt. But it is I also see it as a Western person who's been oversaturated with these types of films my whole life, as a little bit of a cultural awakening as well. And China's reaching that world stage prestige where, you're not quite a world power until you're making high quality world cinema, right? Isn't that the way it works?
Well, okay. So here's the thing. Okay, so 90% of the Japanese right now, they have negative views about China. Okay, that's the Pew Research poll. So these two countries, but they don't do polls in China, so not that we know of. So from what I've seen, it'll be very hard for you to find a Chinese person on social media who says positive things about Japan. Okay, it's I mean, there have been like a lot of cases. For example, Japan, funds these scholars, the Chinese scholars, to go to Japan, to live in Japan, and to try to build, the positive relations between those two. And when these people, they say something remotely positive about Japan, there's a huge outcry in the Chinese social media.
Look, I could have you on all night. Your unique perspective is sorely missed in a place like Australia, where we kind of often see things through that Western prism, and not so much from a unique multipolar perspective based in one of the great emerging powers on the planet, India. So, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for going a bit back and forth on some of these issues. We don't always see eye to eye, but it's just so good to get a bit of a perspective from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Joel.